I am DM Zone. This is Gamers Oasis. Let's get into it. Okay, guys. In this video, we're going to talk about Halflings in original Dungeons and Dragons. It's a race that could be a few different classes and that type of stuff. I'm going to get into all that in just 1 second. I wanted to give you a quick little, this is what my end thoughts were, just in case that was what you were wanting. And I'm going to jump back into the video and talk more about this in greater depth. I'm okay with Halflings in this game, in this world, I guess you could say, being limited to fighters and thieves. I think they excel very well at it. I think that with a few tweaks, they're a very fun, playable class. There was a lot more love shown to this race after the core books came out, after the supplements came out, in the Homes Edition, and in BX, Basic Expert, and in the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. There was more depth to the race that came out, and I think that was partially because the lawsuit was essentially finalized and they knew where they stood with a lot of these things. And I think there was a little bit of editing at the last minute that hindered people to be able to play this race as it should have been, which in my opinion says that a DM should be a little bit more understanding when it comes to what can this racing do and how does it fit in into the world. So in the original content and in a lot of the, or most of the non-official PDFs you can still find the word Hobbit in the original books. But that because of the result of the lawsuit that came by someone who worked in Hollywood on behalf of the Tolkien estate, a lot of things got removed. Halfling was one of the things that was removed, but there was things of discussions about whether Balrogs had wings or not, what was clearly defined, treants, all sorts of things of that nature. I'm going to do a video talking specifically about the lawsuits and all that came up at a later time. I'll probably do one per lawsuit because I want to dive into them a little bit, and then we'll go from there. But some of the things that kind of came out from this was there was nothing Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, no Silmarillion type of thing in Dungeons and Dragons for a long time. Now in the newest version of the game, you can now find something called Adventures in Middle-earth, but that's a story of another day. Basically, while all this was going on, the mythology, the myth of all the things from Middle-earth was scrubbed out of the books, leaving a lot of it kind of barren and incomplete, which we're going to get into in this video. You can tell by the tone and the feel of the author and the editor, who I assume to be mostly Gygax during the core books, because he had not hired Tim Cast yet until Supplement 1, that there was a little bit of a conflict, a little bit of a lean, shall we say, towards this particular thing. Literally, the starting part for Halfling says this. I'm going to try and read it verbatim here. Halflings. Should any player wish to be one, he will be limited to fighting men, aka fighters, as a halfling, period. Halflings cannot progress beyond 4th level, hero. And it continues. That is a very negative, closed type of thing. Like, it's very depressing. For trying to get you inspired to play one of these, I don't think this does that. I think this kind of pushes you towards other things, or is begrudgingly left in because so many other things, Halfling or Hobbit, was left in the core books. But I think they knew they were going to run into problems with the word Hobbit, even at this point in time. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm completely off on this, but I really do feel like that was the case. Not everything Halfling is negative. They do get magic resist like dwarves. which is +4 to the level. So a 6th level halfling, if you could ever have one, would actually count as a 4th level fighting man or fighter that is a human. Another thing they talk about in these books, and is later clarified, I'll get to that in a little bit, is that they have deadly accuracy with missiles, which is detailed in Chainmail. Now, this specific thing, Chainmail, is a completely different game. It uses some of the different rules. Original Dungeons & Dragons recalls back to it several ways. One of the ways it calls back to it is in the 3 combat systems that it recommends, which is fantasy, man-to-man, and what I call mass combat. And I'm leaving out jousting in this, but those are the 3 main fighting ways you could have that. And having a deadly bonus isn't really covered in that thing. So we have to go to basically a correction, which came out in Supplement 1. One of the other things that's important to know about Chainmail is a war game. It wasn't a small scale, skirmish scale, nothing. This is army against army, if that makes sense. So it was very different. It was wrote for a very different thing than D&D was. Okay, so let's break down some of what they're limited to be. Okay, they can only be fighters according to the core books. Later, they can become thieves when you get into the Supplement 1. Supplement 1 was, Greyhawk was a great book for halflings. They gained a lot of things. However, being limited to 4th level fighter is terrible. It's a tough one. Even if you're only playing the first few levels, you basically are done leveling very quickly. If your game were to continue on, you'd have to become a thief, which is unlimited. But if you started out as a fighter and then you went to thief, you're going to be losing half your XP to fighter, which is no longer progressing, while you level up as a thief. Slower than everyone else. I think if you're trying to play someone like Sam or Frodo, this would be pretty much impossible in the rules as they are written originally. The addition of a thief makes it a little bit more possible, but that's still a very hard thing. And I believe this was very specific due to some of the frustrations that Gygax was facing with the Tolkien fan influence and fandom, maybe, I guess you could say, and like the Tolkien estate, and probably not being eye to eye with them or not being able to talk to him at all. Some of the things that really make me feel like there's a huge negative tone to this is the should any player wish to be one, plus several of the other choice wordings here and there talking about their limitations and this type of stuff. I mean, I know I've seen other things where it talks about they can only use certain weapon sizes because anything of any normal man size would be big for a halfling and that type of thing. There's also a gap. There is no description of for the race. Like there's also no description included of what the race looks like. So you only have other fiction to pull from. There's also a lack of halfling being on what I'm calling the XP per class level table that the other classes get. So you have dwarves, elves, and presumably human, because that's what the class basically defaults to. But there's no halfling. It has a spot where it says elves are restricted to 4th level as a fighter, but you would think elves or halflings would be sufficient for that, and it wouldn't change anything other than basically adding a word or 2 words and halfling. When I got to the raise dead spell, there was exclusion towards the halfling in that. It says specifically in the raise dead spell that only men, elves, and dwarves can be raised. No halflings. You can't raise enemies that are monstrous races, so they can't do that. That's crazy. They can be reincarnated by a magic user type, but then they're not guaranteed to come back as a halfling. Matter of fact, they're likely not. So the magic users have something for them, but the clerics do not. I don't want to read too much into that, but I find that a little bit ironic. So I don't want to taint the rest of this video with this, and I'm going to have more positive things to say. However, I am going to leave the original text as it was when it goes across the screen in case someone wants to read exactly what was said. So halflings do enjoy many other benefits that the demi-humans may have, like elves and dwarves. They hear noise better, secret doors, and they have thief skill bonuses. So like the humans don't get thief skill bonuses, but dwarves, elves, and halflings do. As a matter of fact, I would actually go on to say that halflings have the best thief bonuses, really making it a heavy lean for a halfling thief. And part of the reason why one would enjoy the Greyhawk supplement book if you're playing a halfling. The main bonus they get for that is they get a +1. Looking at that +1 to hear noise, the hear noise check is done on a D6. Humans hear noise at a door on a 1 in 6 chance. Halflings and elves and dwarves hear on a 1 in 2 on a D6. Now, mind you, that is a fighter thing, not a thief thing, because thieves have their own greater ability to hear noise. And as a matter of fact, if you look on book 3, page 9, when it talks about the hear noise, that's speaking of basically the racial ability to do that, not the class. And again, that's if you're using my version of the book. Your version might be a little different. There are different versions of it came out, some that are official copies and some that are not official copies. You get the general idea. So and from here on out, when I talk about page numbers, we're just going to use the version I have, which is the one I got off of drivethrurpg.com. When you look at hear noise in supplement 1, which is on page 11, under thief, they get the +1. So halflings get 1 or 2 for being a halfling, or they can get a 1 or 2 as a thief. And then because they're a thief, they get +1. So a human thief would have a 1 or 2, but they don't get other bonuses. Where this starts to get a little bit gonzo and crazy is later on. As the thief levels, the scale goes up a little bit on that too, from a 1 through 2 or 1 through 3 or a 1 through 4 and so on. On level 11 and 12, they are kind of ridiculous. So a thief normally is a 1 through 6 on a D6. That basically means they cannot fail. Great. On a level 11 thief, they're 1 through 5, which means that a 5 through 1, anything but a 6, a thief normally would be fine. A halfling means anything on a D6, they're fine. 6s are not failed. It comes a little bit gonzo and crazy at 13th level because then it goes 1 through 6. Halflings be 1 through 7 on a D6 dice. So maybe there are some unspoken negative modifiers, like being able to do things beyond the mortal ability, like hearing words as someone writes, or hearing noises from beyond the room that you're next to. I'll put up a little depiction over here talking or showing that what I'm talking about. And hearing words as they're being wrote isn't actually as far-fetched as one might think. The differences in hearing the scrapes or the differences in if you're using like a chisel might allow a person to be able to visualize the words. Remember, thieves at like 10th level start to get abilities to read magic, essentially, and they can start reading scrolls at like 4th level, and they get like the ability to know other languages at some point in time. Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily as far-fetched as one might think, but just being able to hear words being wrote, I think that's an interesting thing that would be really specific and unique. The thieves, as I get into when I talk about thieves, really their skills were considered to be nearly magical. Climbing sheer surfaces is something anyone can do, but a sheer surface is not. And that's where you kind of run into, well, my dwarf can do the same thing as your, whatever thief. And that's, I think, kind of something they had to get by a little bit, if that makes sense. Some way to separate themselves from the normal game mechanics that's around them. So, I've talked about the corrections in Supplement 1. These corrections are some of the bigger ones, in my opinion. It finally defined what deadly accuracy with missiles means. In this case, it means an impressive +3 to hit. This is one of the larger bonuses that you can find in the game. And it would stack just like stats would stack, but it stacks with stats. So in Magic, I think this is one of the earliest places outside of stats that you find bonuses. Outside of like a strength modifier and a magic modifier, I don't think you find this in too many other places. And so is that hear noise. I really don't feel like you find that in a whole lot of areas. Another thing that Halflings gain in this is they do not have to be only lawful. They can now be neutral or lawful. Again, sort of a weird restriction to put on a race that they can only be lawful or only be a certain alignment, but that was a very common thing back in the day. And it wasn't until really 3rd edition that things start to open up a little bit, but they didn't open up really until 4th and 5th edition, where it got rid of a lot of the alignment-based structure in the game. So this race seems interesting to me because it limits almost how Gygax didn't want the race, the class, the race, whatever you want to call it, to succeed. Yet he wanted his game to do well. I think he was tired of all the Tolkien fantasy that was coming out during this period of time. Tolkien was on a very big high at that moment. And I believe that he was very conflicted on how he wanted to represent this in his game. You can clearly see the footprints and fingerprints all over his game with it. But I'm okay with Halflings in this game, in this world, I guess you could say, being limited to fighters and thieves. I think they excel very well at it. I think that with a few tweaks, they're a very fun, playable class. There was a lot more love shown to this race after the core books came out, after the supplements came out, in the Homes Edition, and in BX, Basic Expert, and in the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1st Edition. There was more depth to the race that came out, and I think that was partially because the lawsuit was essentially finalized, and they knew where they stood with a lot of these things. And I think there was a little bit of editing at the last minute that hindered people to be able to play this race as it should have been, which, in my opinion, says that a DM should be a little bit more understanding when it comes to what can this racing do and how does it fit in into the world. Editor Zone here. As I was finishing this up, I completely remembered I forgot something. Halflings do not have infravision, ultravision, or dark vision. They have normal human sight. Yeah. Forgot that too when I went to play one once. It's kind of an odd thing to not have them have. They're the only demi-human that doesn't have some sort of specialty sight. Anyways, guys, if you like this video, let me know in the comments down below. If there's anything I missed, let me know that too. If you have any thoughts on where I should go in the future, let me know that too. If you like it, give me a like. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Keep rolling those dice.